Trend Magazine's 1976 Import Car of the Year, the Celicas from Toyota.
Back in 1970, Toyota began to import a small car called the Celica to the North American market to compete directly with the Ford Mustang. It evolved over 36 years and 7 generations to become one of Toyota's longest-running sports car nameplates. But soon after the start of the new century, the Celica name would disappear as Toyota left the sports car market in the U.S. This is a story of the Toyota Celica. This is my old car.
Get a Toyota. Quality.
You ask for it, you got it, Toyota.
By the way, depending on where you're from, you may not know this car as a Celica, but instead as a Celica.
Well, if that bloke had been a Toyota Celica, I can tell you right now what it would have been reincarnated as. A Toyota Celica.
At least that's how I've heard it pronounced by people in the UK. But since I'm from America, you'll keep hearing me call it the Celica. With a huge public reaction to the 1964.5 Ford Mustang, Toyota saw the potential for importing a small sports car to compete for attention from U.S. buyers. Using a platform that is shared with the Carina sedan, the Celica was slightly larger than the Toyota Corolla at the time. Although initially only offered as a notchback sedan, Toyota later imported a hatchback model, or as they called it at the time, a liftback. The look of the Celica was so influenced by the Mustang, especially in its liftback form, that any attempt to do such a blatant copy of a different automaker's model today would likely result in a lawsuit. Indeed, it sometimes takes a second look of a photo of a 70s Celica to confirm it's not a Mustang. The first-gen Celicas were also the only generation to have their coupe body style be a true hardtop, since it had no B-pillar. First-generation Celicas, which lasted from 1970 to 1977, had one of several four-cylinder engines ranging from 1.4 to 2.2 liters with 4-speed manuals or 3-speed automatics and rear-wheel drive. Most imported to America were at least 2 liters, due to the higher taxes the Japanese placed on the larger displacement of cars sold in Japan. American-bound Celicas also had to eventually conform to U.S. regulations, such as 5-mile-per-hour bumpers. Celicas sold in Japan also had their outside mirrors positioned way out in the middle of the front fenders, as opposed to the U.S. models having mirrors where Americans would more likely expect them attached to the doors. The 1978 model year started the second generation, with a design made in the United States. The missing B-pillar was replaced with a very wide B-pillar, although still frameless doors. Offered in both coupe and liftback, they initially started out with 4 round headlamps, but changed over to 4 square headlamps a couple years later. Some Celicas from this generation and the next were referred to as Toyota Celica Supras, as the Supra model debuted in 1978, being the same car as a Celica from the doors rearward, but with a slightly longer front end to accommodate the Supra's inline 6-cylinder engine. The Celica's 4-cylinder ranged from 1.5 to 2.3 liters, but the transmissions were upgraded by 1981 to offer 4-speed auto or a 5-speed manual. The 1982 Celica marked the first model year of the third generation. The 4-cylinder engine choices remained largely the same, but the 3-speed transmissions were dropped. Although still available in 2-door coupe or 3-door liftback, the liftback would grow to be the more popular model. Its very 80s squared-out design was most radically different in the front, initially with single square headlamps that rested at a 45-degree angle when turned off, but raised to a 90-degree angle when they turned on. By the 1984 model year, the headlamps had become fully retractable. The Celica Supra would also get redesigned for 1982, and again primarily differed from the Celica with its own unique retractable headlamp design. Also by 1984, a convertible was offered, which was a coupe that had been converted via American Sunroof Company, or ASC. ASC would continue to provide convertibles for Celicas up through the 6th generation, ending in 1999. Some of the convertibles were sold in Japan, which means those cars traveled across the Pacific Ocean twice, first heading east as a coupe, and then later heading west as a convertible. The 1986 model year started the 4th generation and the most radical changes for the Celica up to that point. It still had the pop-up headlamps, but became slightly more rounded with less sharp edges. The biggest changes, however, were underneath, where it switched from rear to front-wheel drive. It was also the year that the Supra would become a separate model, taking over the old Celica's Toyota A platform, and the Celica moving to the T platform, shared with a less sporty Toyota Corona. The move from rear to front-wheel drive and splitting off from the Supra was definitely a letdown for fans of the Celica. But by 1987, Toyota started to import its GT4 model to North America as the All-Track Turbo, with a 2-liter turbocharged 4 making 190 horsepower. The All-Track was the first 4-wheel drive offering in the Celica's history and allowed the GT4 to compete in its first rally circuit in 1988. 1990 marked the start of the Celica's 5th generation.
Have you tried the new Celica? You want to run with Eddie? Then get with it!
Gone was the 80s boxy styling replaced with a more rounded, slightly more jelly bean-like look that would come to define the look of many 90s cars. Although standard with a 1.6-liter 4, the all-track turbo became the Celica's most powerful engine up to that point, rated at 200 horsepower. It also became the most expensive, with options such as anti-lock brakes, leather seats, power sunroof, and a premium sound system. A rally car version was also built with steel wheels and several options removed to save weight. The look of the 6th generation Celica starting in 1994 is one of the more controversial.
And the most technologically advanced Celica Toyota has ever created. The all-new Toyota Celica.
Ditching the pop-up headlamps for a much more bug-eyed look with 4 large round headlamps. Gone was the turbo all-track in the US, replaced with a GT Sport Pack engine that only made at most 145 horsepower. All other markets still offered their version of the all-track, the GT4, which now had as much as 251 horsepower. Even more improvements were made to the rally car version with its unique aluminum hood, turbocharger, and super strut suspension. At the 1999 Detroit Auto Show, Toyota revealed its Celica XYR concept, which essentially looked just like the upcoming 7th and final generation of the Celica. The 6th gen's jelly bean look gave way to a more chiseled profile with large triangular headlamps. Gone were the coupe and convertible, with the liftback being the only body style available. It also only had 2 trims, the GT and GTS, with either 140 or 180 horsepower. It had a couple facelifts during the generation's 6-year run, but for the most part stayed unchanged. At the start of the 21st century, Toyota's average buyer age was increasing, and the look of the new Celica was meant to attract younger buyers back to Toyota. But this proved to be an uphill battle, as Toyota was forced to end the production of the slow-selling Supra in 2002. In mid-2004, Toyota announced that the Celica, along with its last remaining sports car, the mid-engine MR2, would cease being imported to the US at the end of the 2005 model year. The Celica continued to be produced only for the Japanese market in 2006, its final model year. The early 2000s saw the end of other once popular Japanese sports cars, such as the Nissan 240SX, Honda Prelude, and the Mazda RX-7. Arguably the most famous of that generation was the first generation Acura NSX, which ended production in 2005. Despite this public shift away from Japanese sports cars in 2003, Toyota launched the Scion brand, a line of sporty compact vehicles that was intended to appeal to a younger demographic, those that considered Toyota to be the car brand their safety-conscious parents would own. But the continued shift towards crossovers and SUVs eventually led to the end of the Scion brand by 2016. Although that shift hasn't killed the sports car market completely, as the Acura NSX came back in 2016, and the Toyota Supra returned in 2019, although it's not entirely a Toyota, since it's built on the same platform as the BMW Z4, and its engine is also made by BMW. I once owned a 2001 Celica GT, which was my first non-American car purchase. It was a huge departure from my previous car, a Dodge Intrepid, most notably in size, with the Celica being about 2.5 feet shorter. I still had 2 young boys at the time, ages 7 and 5, but by that age they were able to climb in and out of the small rear bucket seats on their own. The salesman at the Toyota dealer was definitely caught off guard, since he saw me drive up in my Intrepid and come in with my wife and kids. He expected I was looking for a Camry or a Sienna minivan, so when I asked to look at the Celica, he thought I was kidding. And honestly, at the time, I wasn't sure about it either, but my wife actually suggested it, as she was driving a minivan and figured we didn't need another large car. I only had my Celica for 3 years, but it wasn't because anything went wrong with it. My Celica did not have anti-lock brakes, which although it was an option, wasn't standard, and there were definitely times I missed it while dealing with Michigan winters. And although it had front-wheel drive, it didn't have much ground clearance if we had just a few inches of snowfall. I also knew that inevitably it would have to be replaced because the older of my 2 boys was starting to have a growth spurt, and I knew he eventually would have trouble fitting in the back seat. Although its replacement had a bigger back seat, it was still not your typical dad car and will be the focus of my next episode. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. If you used to own a car from the 80s to early 2000s that you almost never see today, and you'd like to see it showcased in a future episode, put a reply in the comments or email me at the address shown here. See you next time.